Hi all, just a quick video to go over Chapter 17 in Pollitt and Beck. It's titled Inferential Statistics, and we're going to be looking specifically at hypothesis testing. This starts on page 383 in Chapter 17. So read through this first and then watch this video. So we've already gone over how to formulate a hypothesis. A hypothesis is just the relationship that you think might exist between two variables. So the question asked what the relationship is between the variables. The hypothesis is the answer you think you might get. So for this purpose of this video, I'm going to use this example here. So the research question would be, are there differences in alcohol intake between ethnicities? And this is based on the NHANES data set that we have. So if you read through the hypothesis testing part of Chapter 17, they talk about a null hypothesis. You can just think about the null hypothesis as there's no difference between the groups. So if you're asking for my example, I would say the null hypothesis is that there are no differences in alcohol intake between the different ethnic groups, and then the alternative is that there are differences between the groups. To prove a hypothesis, you have to run statistical tests. We won't go into that in this video, but fortunately we have computer programs that can run these tests for us, and then they spit out the results. So if you are comparing variables and you say, okay, the null is that there's no difference, if you compare these two and you get a significant result, then it means, there are differences between these two groups that could not be due to chance. So you're going to reject this null hypothesis and say the alternative hypothesis must be true. So the steps in hypothesis testing are to select the appropriate statistical test, establish the level of significance. So what statistical result will you need to get to say, yes, there are differences between the variables? So for the NHANES data, we will use 0.05. And then you select a one-tailed or a two-tailed test, and we will select two-tailed for this. And then you'll compute the statistic with the data using SPSS. So for the research plan, we will just be proposing the test that we're going to do. We won't actually have to run the test because this is a research proposal. You're going to ask for some grant money, hypothetically. So you're just proposing what you're going to do. After you get approved is when you will actually perform the research, hypothetically. One thing you kind of have to know in order to put information into the table in Pollitt and Beck to find out what statistical test you run is whether the two groups or two variables that you're comparing, are they independent or dependent? So independent groups means you can only be in one group. So for example, gender and ethnicity, you can only be in the male or female group. You can only be in the Mexican, American, non-Hispanic, white, non-Hispanic, black, etc. So you didn't have the choice to pick more than one answer. So you're only in one group here. Dependent groups are when you might have the same group of people that you're testing twice, or you're comparing the differences between the group before and after an intervention. So they're the same people in the group, you're just comparing before and after, like a pretest. So you might give educational intervention. You give the group a pretest to test their knowledge before, give the intervention, give them the post-test, and then you compare the difference between the scores, the average scores between the two groups. Commonly used tests are t-test, ANOVA's, Pearson's R, and chi-squared. And we are just going to be looking at bivariate statistical test. Bivariate just means that you only have one dependent variable. You can have more than one independent variable, but we're only looking at one outcome variable. If you have more than that, it's called multivariate statistics, and we're not going to go there. So using the example I gave you, so we have the null. In ethnic groups, there are no differences between alcohol consumption and the alternative. In ethnic groups, there are differences between alcohol consumption. So I've done the first step here and come up with my hypothesis. Then the next step really is to define my variables. So the variable in the example, the ethnicity, was defined when we did the demographic data of the sample. So I just put in here the independent variables, race and ethnicity. More about the breakdown, I would give information about that here, and then say this is a nominal variable because it's 5 different groups. That they're just names, and there's no meaning between the difference of the names of the ethnic groups. And then I just said that these were independent groups because you can only be in one of those groups at a time. So I've defined this variable. And then for the next variable, alcohol consumption, I've defined this as what variable it is in the NHANES data. And so they asked participants if they drink beer in the summer. And there was 9 possible answers, so I have them listed here. And so if you look at these 9 answers, they are really, there's no equal interval in between 1 time per month, 2 to 3 times per month, 1 to 2 times per week. They're not equal intervals in between these selections. So it's not interval data, but it's ordinal data. So there is some order to them, starting with the least amount of drinks that you can have. I just saw this cool feature that I have this little pointer here. So there is some order that 1 time per month is the least amount, and then you're going down here to 6 or more times a day is the maximum amount. So there is order. This is the minimum, this is the maximum, but not in equal intervals between these answers. So it's not interval, but it's ordinal data. So using this hypothesis and these variables, let's look at the chart that is in Pollitt and Beck, and it is actually right in the front cover of the book, and it's also in your book on page 384. So for the example that we have here, I'll turn on my pointer again. So we will start with what is our dependent variable. So our dependent variable was alcohol consumption, and it was ordinal. Our independent variable was ethnicity. So we go to these columns here for independent variable. This is only dependent variable. These are all the independent variables. So I had ethnicity, and they were independent. First of all, they ask you, is it 2 groups or is it 3 groups or more? So in ethnicity, there was 5 groups, so it's 3 groups or more. Were they independent or dependent? And yes, they were independent. So I will use this column here and this column here, and we see that the answer would be the Kruskal-Wallis H test. So the easiest way to display this information is really to create a table. In this table, you can have independent variables in this column, outcome variables in this column, and then write down the statistical test here. So this week, I would like you to email me by Sunday your research question, your alternative hypothesis, your variables and how you're defining them and measuring them, and then a table with the tests. So for this example, kind of look like this here. This does not have to be APA format when you're sending it to me on Sunday, but you might as well put it in APA format because it's part of the final research plan, which is due next week. So get a jump start on writing it all up and submit to me this research question, hypothesis, variables, how you're defining them, and a table with test. I will submit this video along with the PowerPoint so you can see it, and also an example of the research plan and what I'm looking for. I hope this video helped, and please contact me if you have any questions. Bye-bye.